Aloha. Welcome to another episode of Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna. Many people believe that education can be the silver bullet or the linchpin that can help solve problems like homelessness, drug addiction, social division, and income inequality. And in Hawaii, of all places, where our many intertwined cultures all cherish our keiki and do all we can to open doors for their successes, we assume that a high priority is placed on having a world-class educational system. But is it? On this show, we talk about the programs available to our keiki, the quality of our facilities and infrastructure, addressing deferred maintenance, increasing the number of cool rooms for our keiki and teachers, a more comprehensive curriculum approach, as well as appropriately recognizing and valuing our teachers and administrative staff. And perhaps most importantly, what life and career opportunities are we providing for our keiki to thrive today and tomorrow? Today's show is going to be a reflection of the past few months of this show. We've had many incredible guests, including Corey Rosenlee of HSTA, Joan Husted, formerly of HSTA, Mr. John Bickle, an amazing teacher, Carrie and Sherry from the new Teacher Mentor and Induction Program, Kawi Sang from the Hawaiian Studies Program, Shannon Cleary, Melissa Handy, and DJ Condon from Les Jardins Academy, as well as Lila Berg, former teacher and legislator, Stephanie Stofosik from the Epilepsy Program, and Georgie DaCosta from the Hawaii Meth Project. At its heart, education is about teaching people of all ages for the purpose of enrichment, knowledge, and preparation for future endeavors. We teach our keiki so that they can be safe, so they can thrive, so they can achieve and hopefully do more than we as their parents were able to do. So they can access or can have access to everything this world has to offer and be limited by nothing and no one. We've explored many themes such as responsibility, teacher assessments and measurements, curriculum and educational approach, technology as a tool, student engagement, safety and awareness, and all while trying to better understand the challenges in hopes of finding better solutions. I believe the biggest challenge we have, that we face every day, is where we as a community place education as a priority. So with that, I think that it is clear that in the minds of people, that in the minds of families and in communities, we respect education. We recognize the importance of education. We see the challenges of it, and we scratch our heads sometimes and wonder, well, why isn't it easier? Why isn't it better than we assume? And I think that is the source, really, of the questioning from my part, what I've been interested in and what I want to really learn and explore, and then see what I can do and see how we might be able to inspire people through shows like this one to talk more about these issues, to find more solutions and to bring more solutions to our communities, to our schools, to our teachers, to our legislators, to see what changes can be made and what's reasonable in that. So I first of all want to thank every guest that we've had so far, and we're going to have several more coming. But I want to thank every guest so far. They've all brought an amazing amount of knowledge and insight. I also want to make sure to thank, because I think I don't always thank the staff and crew here at Think Tech Hawaii. Amazing people, and I appreciate really every day that I'm here with them. But first of all, I want to go in a little bit about teachers. One of the things that I believe I have learned over the past couple of months here doing this show about teachers is that there's an enormous amount of pressure that is put on the teachers, an enormous amount of responsibility that is just put on their shoulders, and that we're expecting them to handle everything for our children. The questions that come in are, can they handle that pressure? Is it even fair that they have that much pressure? What are the actual expectations that we should have of them? And then really, where are they And what are they doing, and how do they do what they're doing, and really where does it come from? And that's the drive. And virtually every show and every guest that we've had, I ask them, well, what's their drive? Why do they do what they do? And it all comes from their heart. It all comes from a desire to make sure that our children, our keiki, have the opportunity to learn and to thrive. And that I appreciate so much as a parent, certainly as a parent, but also just as a member of the community. And with all of my friends and all of my neighbors, everyone wants the same thing. So then I say, well, why is it such a challenge? Why are there so many challenges? Why is it always such a question as far as, well, why is it not more of a priority? Why isn't it a greater priority? Why don't we place it at the top of the list? Why is it always something we have to scramble for and scratch for? Why do programs get cut? Why are we always asking questions like, well, why can't we cut music? And why can't we cut art instead of something else? Well, that's a funding question. Where does that funding come from? And why is the funding not there? If it was there last year, if it was there the year before, why is it not there now? And what's happening? That's a legislative question. That certainly is a question with regards to the Department of Education and the Board of Education. So it's a huge topic. Something to really think about with regards to our teachers is that they're professionals. They went to school and they have a degree. Sometimes it's subject specific, other times it's more general, but they have a degree. They have an education specifically geared towards teaching. And then they had to get teacher certification. They had to be qualified to teach. So they're professionals. They're professionals in a way that many of us are not when we get our jobs, when first out of school or first out of college or whenever we have jobs. Teachers are trained, specially trained for this. So I think that it's important that we give them that respect and we really think about them from that perspective. We put our children in their hands. I have often said that our children see our teachers more than they see us on a day-to-day basis. Weekends not included, but certainly throughout the day. We'll see them for an hour in the morning, we'll see them for a couple of hours in the evening, but 8-10 hours they're at school. So they're some of the most important people in our children's lives. And we need to respect them for that. And we need to help them and be supportive of them, from my opinion, from my perspective. Then it's the question of responsibility. How much responsibility do we put on them? Throughout this show, we've talked about, well, it would be great if teachers knew how to be able to assess epilepsy, an epileptic seizure or episode. It would be great if the teachers would be able to identify substance abuse, if there's meth or any other drug involved. And we want them to be able to see that and recognize that. We want them to be able to obviously go through class to class to class and learn. But what are we expecting them to learn, and how are we expecting them to learn? And do we really expect them all to learn the same way? I think that there's a lot that needs to be understood there. And then, outside of just the teacher, what about the administration for that particular school? What about the Department of Education itself? What about the community? What about the family? I think that that's been made clear, that the responsibility for a child's education is not just that child, it's not just that teacher. It really requires everyone. So I know there are a number of books that have been put out there. It takes a community. We know it takes more than just one person. So I think that sometimes we need to remember that the teachers can't be on top of everything. They can't see everything, and we need to respect them for that and appreciate what they do and how they do it. Then I want to talk about the teacher shortage that we have. And that's been made clear that we don't have enough teachers, whether it's special education or standard education from K through 12. And actually, it's also true at the university level, at University of Hawaii. And there's a problem there, and we have challenges there. But as far as having enough teachers and enough qualified teachers, we don't have them. Okay, well, why? That's where the question of pay comes in. Do we pay them enough? Starting salary is often $30,000, $35,000 a year. That's a huge problem. How can we expect someone to make a choice to take a $30,000 a year job when cost of living in Hawaii is so high? And just assume that they're going to be responsible for our child's education and be happy about it. Well, they are happy about it. But it's hard to make sure that we have enough qualified teachers if they're not being paid enough. And if the classrooms have fallen apart, or if they don't have the technology they need, or if they're not able to actually teach and use their profession, but they're given restrictions. So this is what you have to teach and how you have to teach it. This is what you need to follow, the guidelines and the curriculum and the structure you need to follow. You need to teach them the test. You need to make sure test scores are up. Well, how do we make sure test scores are up? How do we do that? It's the teacher's role. It's the teacher's responsibility. Well, it's not just their responsibility. There are issues. There are social issues. There are cultural issues. There are nutrition issues. And they all need to be addressed, and they all need to be understood. And not just in a conversation between me and a guest, but it needs to be understood in our community. It needs to be understood between neighbors. That everything that we do and how we do it, as far as our schools are concerned and our neighborhoods, are also our responsibility. Not just the teachers, not just the administration. So I think that's an important thing. So how do we get more teachers? Well, they currently sign contracts where they work 9 months out of the year and they get paid. A couple of years ago, we had the awful problem where, well, in order to deal with the funding issue, rather than put more funding in education, they decided to do a furlough program. Well, that thankfully has ended. That's put much more damage into families, actually, than I think the intention was. But now, teachers are back to work, but they work for 9 months. Well, why not 12 months? Why don't we have them on a 12-month contract? Okay, well, people say, well, does that mean we're going to pay them less? Well, again, do we want the least paid person teaching our children? Do we want a professional to be disrespected by not giving them a salary that is beneficial to them, that helps them thrive, so it helps the classroom thrive? It's difficult when you're struggling personally to make sure that that struggle doesn't enter the classroom. It's difficult that it doesn't enter your workplace. So I think that needs to be understood more, and that conversation needs to be had more. What we pay our teachers and why, and how we respect our teachers through pay, but through other means. We always talk about, well, how many students per class? Well, okay, maybe there's a number that is a good number. Well, some classrooms have more. That number, I think we've talked about. People seem to think that 24 kids in a classroom is best. I know that at Campagna schools, certainly through 5th grade, they have a maximum of 24 students per class, 12 boys and 12 girls. Well, maybe that's a magic number. You know, maybe we need to look at models such as Les Jardins. Maybe we need to look at models such as Punahou and Iolani and Campagna schools and make sure that our public education system is matching that. Because that is what everyone wants. That's where we want our kids to go. Everyone wants their kids. If we can afford it, if we can get them in, we want them to go to those schools. Well, you know what? That makes it a social and economic challenge. And that's not really fair for all kids. Children didn't ask to be born where they were born. They didn't ask to have their situation. But they are asking to learn, and they are asking to have a bright future. And isn't it our responsibility to help them achieve that? So that, I believe it is. I believe it is. And then going back into curriculum, what they teach and how they teach it. We have heard that, well, okay, they're teaching the test. Well, the only way to improve test scores is to let's just teach them the test. Let's make sure they know how to take the test. Well, okay, not all kids are good at taking tests. I actually wasn't very good at taking tests early in life. I had to learn. Well, that's why I'd have someone teach me. Well, this is how you think about a test. So test theory. I didn't get that when I was in 4th grade. I didn't get that until, I think, high school is when I began to really get that. Well, that's an important thing. Well, what about life skills? What about teaching our kids life skills, career skills, how to think about career, how to think about applying what they're learning? All kids look at geometry, for example, and say, well, geometry doesn't have an application. Unless I'm a mathematician, unless I'm going to go be an engineer, I don't need to learn geometry. Why do I have to spend so much time, an entire semester, doing geometry? Well, you know what? If we actually did more application. We had Mr. John Bickel on air a couple of weeks ago. And his program, his American Studies program, what he does is he actually teaches civics through action, through practice, and through application. So all of the kids in that class come out of there understanding, oh, that's actually how someone gets elected. Oh, that's actually how we make a bill. We actually discussed and we debated creating a bill, and we got it written up. and we had to put it through the process. Oh, we learned how that works. Well, that's an important skill, to know how that works so that we, as the general public, know how to engage our community leaders, know how to engage our legislators, to say there are some changes that we would like, and let's do that. Let's talk about it. Let's make these changes. Let's work together to do that. They are there to listen. They are there to help and support the community. But you need to learn it, so you learn it in an application. If you can create a program where you're learning by applying your sciences, you're learning by applying your math, then it can make a lot more sense into daily life. It just makes some sense to me. How to do that, different people learn differently, but I think that there's opportunities to consider that. I think some schools do consider that, and they do look at it from a different perspective. Certainly the private schools do. Private schools have a different approach on how they do their classrooms and how they do their curriculum. And I think that it needs to be explored so that we can understand better as a community how we're helping our kids thrive, not just through the test, but for the rest of their lives, through their careers. So I think that's an important issue. So we're going to take a quick little break at the moment. I've been talking a lot for the past few minutes. So we're going to take a little break. I appreciate it. So once again, welcome to Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna. And I look back, we're looking back a little bit, and we're also going to look forward a little bit as well. So when we come back, we're going to talk about facilities. We're going to talk about our children a bit more. So thank you so much. See you soon.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, offering lifelong learning from passionate hosts and fascinating guests ready to explore and explain Hawaii's place in the 21st century. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Aloha, welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna. Today our show is about reflections as well as thinking forward. So I want to go a little bit into our facilities as well as a bit more into our kids. A lot has been talked about over the past several months, past several years about the infrastructure and about our facilities. We know there's deferred maintenance. We know some of the classrooms are crumbling. Walls are crumbling. Sometimes they just need to be repainted. Yeah, okay. Sometimes they really need a new wall. It needs to be patched correctly. We need new facilities. So there was talk, I think at the beginning of this legislative session, there was talk about building a $35 million building. Constructing one building that was going to cost $35 million out at Campbell Industrial Complex out there. Well, that seems like it's awfully high, considering in many other cases, that could be an entire campus. And wouldn't it be better that we have a whole new campus? One of the challenges out there, as we were just discussing, was class size. There are too many kids per class, so they need to have another classroom, well, which means they're going to need more teachers, and we already don't have enough teachers. Well, okay. So I believe that whole discussion has gotten itself down to where, okay, they are going to get a new building, but it's not going to be a $35 million building. So it's important to get that, so I'm glad that we're getting that. I'm glad that we're not spending as much money on it, but I do think we need to consider more schools. But we also need to consider the schools that we currently have, upgrading that infrastructure, making sure that we're patching just the holes that exist in the walls. There are some schools that have leaks. When it rains, it leaks into the classrooms. Well, who's repairing that? Who's looking into that, and why isn't that addressed? Why isn't that addressed more immediately? Yeah, there's always, well, where do we find the money for it? Well, is the budget for this and that and the other? Well, why isn't that a priority? Why are we going to wait a decade before we make the repairs? Because it gets worse. It gets more expensive the longer we wait. So that's something that needs to be looked at, whether it's, yes, putting air conditioning in classrooms. I may have mentioned this on air before. I'm pretty sure I have. But one of my kids goes to my elementary. It's great. great school, actually. It's one of the quote-unquote feeder schools. And so it's a wonderful school, a wonderful principal, Mr. Len Ueda, and his entire staff, and all of the teachers are great. We really appreciate the education that our children have been getting from them. When it got really hot last year, I was one of the many parents who showed up Mr. Ueda's room and said, hey, what if I brought you an air conditioner? Can we put it in the classroom, install it so that these rooms can be cooler? And he looked at me and said, you know what? Yeah, you're not the only parent to come up and ask, but thank you for asking. I really wish we could do that. But you know what? Our electrical service needs to be upgraded first. If we were to take even one of these air conditioners that people want to bring in and plug it into the classroom, we can shut down our entire system and we can blow circuits. So the infrastructure needs to be improved. We need to address that. Well, there are some schools that have actually achieved that. I was able to had a really good conversation with Waterloo Elementary School a couple of months ago. And they told me that they have all but 10 classrooms have air conditioners in them. I said, wow, that's amazing. So how have you done that? Well, their parent-teacher organization has done that. They were able to pull all of the money together to pay for all of the air conditioners, and they've slowly been going one room at a time, sometimes a couple of rooms at a time, to get them refitted and get them fit with an air conditioner. Well, that's wonderful. I said, well, what about the infrastructure? What about your electrical service? How did you get that done? And they said, well, about a decade ago is when we started. We started asking, can we get this upgrade done? Can we get this upgrade done? We would ask every year, and then we finally got it. So they got their infrastructure upgrade. They got their service upgrade so they can actually improve the classrooms by putting air conditioning in them and other technology for that matter. So they got that done. Alrighty, well, is it because they lobbied harder or what? Is it because the legislators were able to pull something off? Maybe. Well, why is it that good for one school and not for all schools? I know Governor Ige at the moment is really trying hard. I know there's an intention from a number of legislators that they want to make sure, in fact, all of them will say they want to get air conditioning in all of these schools. Well, then we need to put it in the budget. We need to create the plan to make that happen. I know they're working really hard right now on trying to make that happen. I only question where it is in priority and why it's lower on the priority than other things. And I would like to have that conversation to see really, is there a more appropriate place to prioritize these concerns? Because again, the air conditioning is not just for the students, it's also for the teachers. We talk about how hard it is for the kids to learn when it's too hot in the classroom. Well, imagine how hard it is for the teachers to teach and maintain focus and maintain command of the classroom when it's that hot as well. So it goes both ways there, and it really is something that I'm glad is being discussed, and I'm very thankful for a number of legislators who've been pushing really hard to get it done, and I'm looking forward to a lot more of that happening. But it needs to be addressed and needs to really be given an urgency. So looking forward to having more of that. But that brings up other aspects. As we're talking about what's going on in school and getting our kids and having our kids have the right conditions in the classroom, well, we're also talking about nutrition. We're also talking about, do they have enough food? We're talking about English as a second language sometimes. And what are we doing and how are we providing the opportunities for all of these kids to thrive? And are we? Are we actually? Well, that's a good question. I had the good fortune of being on a working group. It was called the Farm to School Plus Working Group. And it's a legislative working group where we came up with ideas and tried to realize the problems and tried to solve the problems of how we get more locally produced foods into our classrooms or into our schools. Because at the moment, above 90%, the exact number isn't clear, but above 90% of the food that our children consume is barged in, is bought in. Well, 92% of the food that we consume from island to island is barged in. Well, above that is what is put onto our into our cafeterias and onto their trays. Well, why can't we have more locally produced foods? Well, we had to go through that and explore that. Well, what were the barriers? What are the challenges? And in many ways, it came down to procurement, how it was procured, and the procurement rules, and how we can best address getting this done and creating a plan. One thing I learned in that process was we do not have there is not one of our public school kitchen managers who are actually certified cooks. Not one of them can actually pick up a knife and cut produce and provide it to our kids. Not one of them. Well, why? Maybe we should put a focus on that. Maybe we should prioritize that and see how much that would cost and see, well, where we can fit that in the budget. I don't know if we know that answer, but I think that would be an important one because that would be great because many of these schools have school gardens, which is a wonderful thing. We need school gardens. It would be great if every school had a school garden. And part of the curriculum for this school was to teach them how to plant, take care of, and harvest, and then replant, save the seeds and replant over and over again, to teach the kids how that works because that's where our food comes from. It would be great if we were able to teach them that. And then not just that, then say, great, now we're gonna take this, now that we grew these tomatoes, now that we grew these beans, we're gonna now take them into the kitchen and we're gonna use these for your lunch. And this is how the cycle works and this is how it should work. But they can't do that. I know a lot of people hear about, oh, well, school gardens. Well, what we don't know, and maybe some people do, is not one vegetable that is produced out of those gardens is actually consumed at these schools. It's either given away or some of it is brought to farmers markets. There are ranges of things that get done with this food, but it certainly is not put on the cafeteria trays for our children to eat. Well, I think we could make a change for that to really improve that. Other challenges we have is, okay, well, if we've got farmers, and by the way, there are technically somewhere around 7,000 farmers that exist in the state of Hawaii. That's another number that I learned. I was amazed by that. That's a lot. Well, that includes your small farmer that just has a small backyard garden. Well, if we had a collection and distribution system, a hub zone, and I know that there's at least one legislator working on that. I believe that Senator De La Cruz is trying to work on that out in Wahiawa. If we actually had a food hub and a collection and distribution network, then you know what? Everybody who's got produce in their yard can provide food. And it can go through this process and it can get certified and it can get processed. Oh, that's the next question. How does it get processed? Because if it's coming from your backyard, how do we certify its quality? How do we certify, the GMO nature or the safety of this food? And how do we handle that? Well, that was the other thing. We needed to have a food processing plant. Well, I know that we don't have one, but I do know that KCC is currently trying to develop one. I know that they're trying to work through the process of getting one built so that we can get this food, collect it from all these 7,000 plus farmers, bring it into the food processing plant and then process it and get that food then into our schools, into our prisons, and into our hospitals. So it's locally produced foods. Well, the next part of that is the farmers. The farmers aren't currently producing the food in order to make that system work. So we need to make sure that we're having the conversation with those farmers to get all of that food available, to make it all available so they're ramping themselves up, so they're producing enough to be able to achieve the goals, which also means we need to change our menus. So I'm just showing you there's a range of different issues and barriers and hurdles that are out there in order to make this happen. But the conversation was had, and we were able to establish a position. We were able to put a bill together that was able to get passed last year, where there is now a person, that person's job is farm to school coordinator, and their job is to actually go through and meet with every one of the stakeholders to try to get more locally produced food grown and then supplied into our schools. So with that, we're gonna take another quick break, so thank you for staying with me, appreciate it. So again, this is Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers, and I'm your host, Carl Campagna. See you in a minute.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I host Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com, which streams live educational and civic engagement on the internet and Oceanic Channel 16. I love doing this show because it's an opportunity to be able to share some of the good news as well as the pressing issues for Hawaii and the world about climate change, climate justice, and sustainability, and the need to start employing and continue to request sustainable policy initiatives and actions on the part of our decision makers here and abroad. So I hope you'll tune in with me every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. as we try and engage you, share a lot of very interesting people's work and perspectives, and perhaps turn you on to taking action for sustainability. Mahalo and aloha.
Aloha, welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm your host, Carl Campagna. So in this last segment, I want to talk, we only have about 10 minutes, but in the last segment, I want to talk a little bit about UH and then a little bit about the new opportunities that I think are on the horizon for education. First of all, as far as University of Hawaii is concerned, there have been they've been beat up a lot, and some of it was justified, and some of it maybe not. But I think what we need to do is realize and recognize that the University of Hawaii is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the state. It's an opportunity for our local kids to be grown up into the professionals that we need. However, we need to make sure that that programming and those education programs that exist and those teachers and those professors are here, and they're here with a purpose, and that is to grow the state. A university can be an economic driver. A university can be a source of international business, international opportunities, if it's used correctly, if it's actually given the opportunities. And that's what I think we should do for the university. We should make sure that we're helping the university bring in professors, not just for a 3-year or 5-year contract and then leave, that we give them the opportunity to stay, that we create the programs, we create the research. There's a significant amount of research that gets done there, but there could be more. And if there were more, and if we were able to elevate it to an international level, to get it onto the academic international stage, then you know what? A lot more people would be interested in coming. A lot more professors who are highly qualified would be interested in not just coming and teaching, but staying here. And that's one of the challenges that we have, getting them to stay here. And then also having a quality program, career-oriented program, creating the opportunities and the jobs and the careers of the future here in Hawaii so our kids don't have to leave, so they can stay here. So that's what I'm going to say about the University of Hawaii. I think that it's a great opportunity, that I think that we need to make sure that we're putting the right focus in on it so that it can achieve its potential. And I'm in full support of that. So with that, the next thing I want to move to is there's a new act. Many of us remember No Child Left Behind. And some people thought it was great. Some people thought it was horrible. I think it depends on what side of the social and economic scale you live on, to a certain extent. I think that the have-nots definitely have not had a good experience with that in many cases. However, we can set that aside because there's a new program. There's a new program that's been devised, a new act that the Obama administration has created, and it's called the Every Student Succeeds Act. I love these, ESSA. I love these acts, the way they name these and title these. Well, what does it do? Well, that's one of the things that I want to discuss, and one of the things that actually I've invited Mr. Daryl Galera, who is one of the leads. I think he's the director of the new task force that Governor Ige has put together to address this, because this new act creates opportunities. It creates changes and it creates opportunities for us to really make a revision to our current academic system, to our current public school system. So one of the things it does is it attempts to reach out to diverse learners. So, as we know, kids learn different ways. Sometimes there's a language issue, sometimes there's a cultural issue, sometimes some kids learn because they're much more logical and linear in their thought process, others are much more creative in their process, so they can't remember numbers and they can't do math as quickly and as simply as someone who's more linear can. Well, okay, well, if there's a way to assess that, if there's a way to bring into the classroom this understanding, that, all these kids learn differently. So we're not just going to teach this one way. It's not just learn this, learn that, learn the other. It's much more open. Oh, you learn this way, you learn that way. Okay, great. Finding a better approach to reaching diverse learners, which also includes ages, various different ages when people come in. Sometimes people need to return to school, whether it's return to high school to get their GED or return to the university level, but making sure that there's more opportunities there. In addition, part of this program, and I want to learn more about this as well, is the military career training. So there are some paths that some take. So maybe it's ROTC or maybe it's some variations of that, where some kids can get on a path. So they are actually moving towards perhaps a more successful career in the military. Maybe there's an option for them there. Maybe what should be looked at in that regard, maybe in other regards, is a much more specific vocational approach, making sure that there's vocational opportunities, because not everybody wants to go to college and become a lawyer or a doctor or any other, or an engineer. Some really want to just go run a business. They want to go learn how to run a business being a mechanic, how to go run a business owning a restaurant and being a chef, and how to do that. Well, if there were other opportunities, that would be great for that. And just providing kids at an earlier age career opportunities and career education. So these are some of the things that are potentially included. I'll say potentially included in what this new act allows. What it does is it gives the states and the school districts within the states a little bit more power in the decision making of what gets done and how it gets done. So rather than the US Department of Education coming down and saying, okay, we want you to teach the kids this way. We want to make sure STEM is in every class and you can eliminate this and you can eliminate that, but this is the most important thing to prioritize. Instead of saying that, say, okay, yes, we do want that, but we want you to be able to shape that how you want. We want there to be standards. We want the standards to be high. We want you to reach higher, but we're going to give you some flexibility in how you achieve that. And I think that's also important because that's, again, teachers are professionals. They were trained to teach. Anybody can sit there and say, okay, here, take this test. Oh, okay, read this. Now write what you read about it. Okay, great, thank you. Now we'll move that here. Now take this test. Well, that's not teaching. So I think that's a huge opportunity to give the states and give the school districts more opportunities to make the changes that they see fit, that they think are important, so therefore community involvement and engagement. So that's where that opportunity is. Make sure that everyone that has their kids or has had their children go to that school shows up and talks and is involved and is engaged in what that's going to mean. So opportunity for that I think is great. And then opportunity for funding flexibility of how things are going to get funded, where it gets funded, and in different ways based on the program that you're creating that you think is much more specific to your district or your state. So these are just a few of the areas. And the reason it's important is what we have at the moment is two-tiered education. We have in Hawaii many wonderful private schools, many of them, several, Mid-Pac, Punahou, Iolani, Kamehameha schools, several others just on the high school level, and some lower levels. And they're great schools, that's wonderful. And then we have our public schools. Some of those public schools are also very good. Some of them are less good. And my question is, why? Why are they less good? Why are we just allowing them to be less good? What is it? Who's doing the assessment on the schools? When Mr. DJ Condon was with us last week, we were talking about, well, okay, well, what about these assessments? And he was saying, well, at their school, they do multiple levels of assessment in order to achieve that. With that in mind, the question is, how can we achieve and how can we bring about utilizing and making sure that we're all paying attention, community to community, person to person, neighbor to neighbor, and then with our school districts, how can we pay much more attention to what the opportunities are with this new law, with this new act that came from the Obama administration. So let's learn more about that. So whether it's next week or in the coming weeks, we're going to have Mr. Daryl Galera here. And he's going to tell us what his thoughts are. I know that he is very active and very engaged. He's very much the epitome of education, mover, shaker, and reformer, because that's exactly what he wants. And I think he's very excited for the opportunity for what he's doing there. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation. So please come back for that when that comes around. But in the meantime, let's think. Let's think about education. Let's talk about education. Let's determine how important it is. Realize that it's how important, but let's determine how we want to prioritize it. And then make sure that our community leaders know. Make sure that our legislators know that we want education to be a priority. That there are other things that we should make secondary to education. And that we should put education at the top. I'll refer to Mr. John Bickel. He had his idea of, well, how about if we take the pyramid and flip it upside down? Well, I think that's an important way to do it. I've suggested, how about we take the, sorry about that, how about we take the education and the budget needed for all of the infrastructure work and all of the payroll and for all of the technology that's needed. And that's the other thing we didn't get into is technology as a tool. That was a wonderful conversation, how we need to make sure our kids are provided with tools of today and of the future. But how we take that and how we put that into the budget, let's put it there first. Let's say, okay, well, we need an additional $500,000 this year or $500 million this year. Make it whatever the number is, let's figure out. We need that. Let's put that in first, and then let's see where we are after that. I think that's an important way to really assess that, really to look at that and see what that means. And I think I would like that conversation as well. So So again, I appreciate you for staying with me today. I know it's been all about me talking today, but I definitely appreciate the opportunity for those who have listened. Looking forward to future episodes. I do once again want to thank Think Tech Hawaii, staff and crew. I want to thank all of my guests from the past, and I'm looking forward to having great conversations in the future to see exactly how we can best shape the state of education here in Hawaii. So thank you again for joining. My name is Carl Campagna, your host of Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Mahalo.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, 25 talk shows by 25 dedicated hosts every week, helping us explore and understand the issues and events in and affecting our state. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.